Good morning. If I could ask folks to just take their seats, we're going to get started. And I'm looking at the council members. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Murphy, Vice President for Government Relations and Community Engagement at Georgetown. And I want to thank you all for being with us today as we release this important report on African American employment, population, and housing trends in Washington, D.C. I especially want to thank Chairman Mendelson and Council Members Gray and White and Silverman. We may be joined by a few more a little bit later. You'll hear from them in a moment. We appreciate the Council's unwavering support and commitment to longtime DC residents, many of whom are African American. They have stuck with the city through the hard times and now sometimes struggle to recognize a place they have lived their entire lives. And those are some of the themes we're going to touch on today. I also want to ask if there are any past or current members of the DC Commission on African American Affairs with us today. If you could just raise your hands. Thank you for being here. We want to thank you for your leadership and honor your presence here today. As some of you know, the report that we are releasing today was prepared at the request of the Commission back when Georgetown University Professor Maurice Jackson, whom you'll also hear from in a moment, was the inaugural chair of the Commission. So without your leadership, we wouldn't be here today, and we're grateful for it. Today's policy briefing and panel discussion are sponsored by Georgetown University's DC Public Policy Initiative. Through this initiative, Georgetown University seeks to better connect the university's public policy expertise with compelling issues that are important to the District of Columbia. And we can think of no more important issue for us to focus that policy expertise on than the state of African American affairs in DC. As you may know, the report that we are releasing today is the second in the series. Last year, we released a parallel report that focused on health disparities. And now, to offer some welcoming comments, it's my pleasure to introduce the chairman of the council, Phil Mendelson. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. I want to thank Georgetown University for its work in this, but I also want to thank Maurice Jackson for being the stimulus behind this, and his work as former chair of the Commission on African American Affairs. And as Chris noted, we were here a year ago when there was the first report, which had to do with health disparities, which was not a pretty picture. 15-year difference in life expectancy between whites and blacks in the city. And I know that my colleague Vince Gray, who's chair of the council's health committee and is going to speak, I think, in a couple of minutes, has been working on this issue. We have a long way to go with that, but this report is on trends in employment and workforce development, which is also not a pretty picture. The unemployment 6 times higher for African Americans and whites in this city, and income disparities 3 times higher, whites greater than African Americans in this city. You know, I like to think, and I say oftentimes at community meetings, that the great equalizer in our society is education. But when you look at the progress we've made with education, public education, and the opportunity is there, but that achievement gap is enormous. Don't quote me on the figure because I don't know the figure exactly, because it doesn't really matter. The disparity is like 80% of white students in our public education system are doing pretty well compared to like 20%, maybe 25% of black students. That achievement gap is huge, and yet education, public education, is the opportunity for the great equalizer in our society. I know that, and I'm not here to give a political speech, but the council very much values the importance of public education, but we haven't figured out how to crack that nut and make that change fast enough. We've seen some progress. Our DCPS and public charter schools are both proud that we have been making some progress in improving test scores. But that gap is so huge, and that gap is not closing fast enough. And that's what needs to happen if we are, in the long term, to make a big difference in terms of employment and workforce development. I guess there was one other statistic I wanted to read, that this mismatch, I'm looking at some notes here, so forgive me for reading, but 60% of new jobs in DC will require training beyond high school. Okay, that's not a surprise. 50% of African Americans in this city have no formal education past high school. And just 26% of African Americans earn a bachelor's degree by their early 20s, compared to 73% of whites. So it's a huge mismatch. It's a huge challenge. And I want to thank, again, Professor Jackson and Georgetown University for its work on this. And thank you all for being here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I want to exercise a point of personal privilege. I get to introduce my old boss, who's someone I really admire and feel very, very lucky to have worked for. Councilmember Vince Gray is no stranger to these issues. They're ones that he cares deeply about. As mayor, I recall intensely him focusing like a laser on putting DC residents back to work. Early in his tenure as mayor, the unemployment rate spiked as high as 10.4% as the district sought to come out of the Great Recession. And on the east end of the city, it was well over 20%. Through a variety of policies, including his innovative One City, One Hire initiative that challenged DC area businesses. And I want to give a shout out to PNC Bank, who is here today. And PNC Bank was very much a participant in that program. Challenged DC businesses to hire at least one unemployed DC resident. The results were overwhelming, with over 10,000 people getting jobs. And when he left office, the unemployment rate had fallen to 7.4% and continued to fall to this day. But I know what he's most proud of is where it fell the farthest, and that was wards 5, 7, and 8, where it fell 27, 24, and 25% respectively, the wards that had been hit hardest by the recession. He also moved to reactivate the then dormant Workforce Investment Council to create and implement a strategic vision for DC's workforce infrastructure and investment system. We're really pleased that he's here today. Councilmember from Ward 7, Vince Gray.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let me make one correction to Chris' presentation, which I rarely do. He referred to me as his old boss. How about former? I want to say good morning to everybody, and I'm really glad to be able to be here. And I want to thank the members, my colleagues who are here as well. And thank you, Chairman, for being a part of this as well. I'm glad to be with you to have all of us be able to get a first view of the 2017 report on African American employment, population, and housing trends in the District of Columbia. I had the honor of appointing Dr. Maurice Jackson to be the inaugural chair of the commission while I was mayor. And I want to thank you, Dr. Jackson, for the work that you did and for your continued efforts in assembling a team of people at Georgetown University, and for your and their hard work to be able to put this report together. The report focuses on the declining African American population in the District of Columbia and its relationship to employment, educational and wealth disparities, job preparedness, skills training, and of course the housing market in the District of Columbia. Obviously, these are issues I have sought to address as mayor and in my roles on the council, because I'm in the recycle program now. My administration started the annual investment of $100 million for affordable housing, and we actually invested $287 million in the second year that we were working on this. Since returning to the council, I've been laser focused on improving the quality of life for Ward 7 and residents on the east end of the District of Columbia. And for those of you who don't know, I just don't use the term east of the river anymore, because when you say east of the river, people unfortunately think, if I know what they think, it's the other side of the tracks. So we have a west end in the District of Columbia. So now we have an east end in the District of Columbia as we work to try to rebrand the other side of the city. The Areas that I've focused on thus far are predominantly African American. A large part of improving the quality of life, of course, is economic development. I've introduced legislation to help catalyze economic development and jobs on the east end of the city, as well as try to build a comprehensive healthcare system. And the chairman alluded to the enormous challenges that we have on the east end of the city in his comments. I've established the Ward 7 Economic Development Advisory Council, which is a 12-member group of experts focusing on bringing new retail, housing, and amenities to the east end of the city. That is to say, we're all grappling with these issues, and there's obviously still a great deal of work to be done, especially on the east end of the city. The District of Columbia is a wonderful place to live. Councilmember Silverman and I were last night at Logan School, where we heard the history of Logan School, which was the elementary school that I attended 432 years ago. What a wonderful school Logan is. It's a great microcosm of what I think our goal ought to be for the District of Columbia. So the residents have to be fully equipped, well equipped with the skills that they need to become valuable members of our workforce. When I see the future of our city, I see sustainable jobs and smart economic growth and specific economic goals reflecting where we want to go in the next 5, 10, 20, and 30 years. I see a workforce development system that has as its roots training and educational opportunities that prepare our residents with skills that match industry demands. And I see strong career and technical education programs in our public schools and public higher education programs that prepare African-American residents to meet the demands of growth industries such as technology, hospitality, and healthcare services. In fact, one of the things I was especially pleased to be able to do was to restore what we used to call vocational education to our secondary schools in the District of Columbia. It wasn't that vocational education was passé, it's just that our curricula were completely outdated. And we were able to bring in the career academies to work with us for a year. And they helped us reestablish areas like information technology, hospitality, allied health, and other areas as endeavors for our young people to be able to pursue. And we now have those curricula in every one of our high schools in the District of Columbia. Why are those curricula? Because that's where the jobs are. That's where they are emerging. So, you know, as we see revitalized communities on the East End and affordable workforce housing so that our teachers and firefighters, police, and other public safety employees can live in the communities which they serve, hopefully we will redouble our efforts and the commitment to make that happen. I also see business owners, organized labor, government officials, job training providers, higher education, and other key stakeholders at the table working together to be able to identify strategic opportunities and targets for growing our economy and creating jobs. I also anticipate that the results released today will be insightful and instructive to guide us to continue to make the necessary investments toward the goals of economic development and job creation on the East End of the District of Columbia. You know, a big part of what reports like this is what we do with it. And that is, I hope that, Chairman, that the council will look at this, you know, have our relevant committees take a role in each one of these. And of course, we hope that the executive will do the same thing. Our goals should be consistent in that regard. So again, we're making progress, but we have an awful long ways to go. Chris, I want to thank Georgetown once again for being on the cutting edge of these kinds of issues, and I appreciate it very much and look forward to being able to read the entire report. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Council Member. One of the things that the council did in recent years, I think, was very, very smart. They pulled out and created a special committee for labor and workforce development issues. In the past, it had been kind of tucked away in another committee, and I don't think it got the attention it deserved. So I really appreciate that the council did that and really provided an opportunity to shine even a brighter light on these issues. And we're lucky that the chair of that committee is here with us today. Let me ask Councilmember Alyssa Silverman to come up and say a few words.
Well, good morning, everyone. So let's just start with one cheer. Let's go Nats. Let's hear it. Let's go Nats. All right. So as Chris said, I am the chair of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee. And I'll just say that one of my first jobs in Washington was working for the New Republic magazine. There was a famous writer there, Michael Kinsley, and he'd always say in Washington, people just read the front and back of books and reports. One time at Kramer Books, he put $20 in the middle of a like, you know, most well-read book to see if anyone would find that $20, because they mostly just read the front and back. No one found it. But so I just read the back of the report and got to the recommendations. And let me say I'm really thrilled because what Professor Jackson recommended is exactly what our committee is working on. And I just want to point out that I'm honored that our committee, one of our committee members is here, Robert White, actually one of the most active members of our committee and a great collaborator, and my staff, Liz Weiss, who is our committee director, and Daniel Savory, who is our senior advisor here as well. So let me just talk about the recommendations. I know you're going to talk about that in the panel, but I'm going to cheat because it's precisely what our committee is working on. So first recommendation, increase agency support. So I'd put an asterisk here because when we got the committee last year, oh no, was that only earlier this year? Oh Lord, earlier this year, we didn't know, you know, I'm a little bit of a gambler. We didn't know where to put our chips because we don't have transparency in outcomes, in our workforce development outcomes. And that's one of the biggest things our committee is working on. We need to put our money where we know we're going to get a great return on investment. And I'm glad to see Kermit nodding here. And that's one of the first things that our committee has worked on, is really trying to work with, and I see Deputy Mayor Snowden here, really trying to work with the Deputy Mayor, whose portfolio really includes the workforce development, and I know is very passionate about this issue, so that we can really make sure that we're investing where we get a great return on investment. So, you know, so Professor, that's one of the things that we are looking at. Number two, project empowerment. So this is a program that is mostly geared toward people with big obstacles. A lot of our returning citizens, they go through 3 weeks of workforce job readiness and then are placed in a subsidized employment program for up to 6 months. I've spent 2 full days with our project empowerment, the last class, and one of the classmates is actually here in the Wilson building, working for Brandon Todd, the Ward 4 council member. It is a good program because I'll tell you why. So one of the things we don't talk about enough, in my opinion, is job readiness skills and soft skills. Some of the biggest obstacles to our residents getting employment are the basics: getting to work on time, knowing how to communicate in the workplace and what is appropriate workplace behavior. I can't tell you how many employers, and I know my council colleagues have heard this too, a lot of employers tell us, if you can get those basics right, if you can give me somebody who can show up on time, is dressed appropriately, and knows how to communicate in the workplace, I can teach them all the rest. The hard skills are what they call the hard skills, you know, the technical skills are the easy part. That's the hard part. So that's something I think that Project Empowerment does really well, that we need to look sort of how we do this soft skill training across the government. SYEP is number 3. So my staff spent a very intense summer. You know, we're on recess largely in the summer, but I'm sorry that Daniel, Liz, and I were not on recess. We spent 6 weeks and an intense look at SYEP, because SYEP is our biggest workforce development program. We spend $20 million on a 6-week summer youth employment program, and I think that's a good thing. But we need, yes, but we need, as I see in the report, to strengthen it. We need to, it's now expanded to 24-year-olds, but what a 14-year-old needs in SYP is a lot different than what a 24-year-old needs in SYP. And so we've taken a really on the ground, we visited more than 24 sites, probably more than 1,000 kids this summer, and took a really good look at SYP, and we'd love to share some of our some of our observations with you, Professor. And then I think my colleagues have said it, but let me skip to 5, apprenticeships. I am so excited about apprenticeships. I know the mayor is, because what we hear from a lot of our job seekers is they can't sit for weeks and weeks and weeks in a training program. They need to earn income. They have dependents, they have families. And what the great thing about apprenticeships is it's on-the-job training while you're earning money. I don't think we're taking advantage of apprenticeships enough in our city. Since my colleagues have talked about the economic inequality, and I know you have Ed here, he's gonna hammer that home with DCFPI's great data, but so many residents, particularly on the east end of our city, as you know, Councilmember Gray, look at all the cranes in the sky and they say, why can't I benefit from this? Where are my jobs? We're gonna open the wharf today. And let me tell you that I wanna thank PN Hoffman and the wharf, because they partnered with our office and the Ward 6 office to do a job fair. And a lot of folks got jobs. Those are the operational jobs, the permanent jobs from that job fair. I think Valerie Ashley is here, wrote me, I think a few people from Southeast Ministry got a job. We need to partner with industry a lot more. I see that's number 4, especially in infrastructure, IT, healthcare. We are just not taking advantage. I mean, our hospitals are our biggest employers. And why is there so much traffic near Washington Hospital Center? Because everyone's driving in from Hyattsville. We need to make sure that we are taking advantage of our strategic industries here. IT, you do not need a higher education degree in IT. You just need certificates. We are not taking enough advantage of that. Anyway, I've spoken too much because I'm so excited about this topic. So I look forward to reading the whole report, not just the 2-page recommendations. And let's go Nats.
Thanks, Councilmember Silverman. And last but certainly not least, Councilmember Robert White is here. We're really appreciative. He is a new member to the council and has provided so much energy on all of the issues that he has touched. So please, Robert White, come on up, welcome him. Thank you for being here today. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm not the expert, so I'm going to go quickly and move on so we can get to the people who know a lot more than I do. But I do want to say a couple things. First and foremost, thank you to Georgetown University. I've met with Georgetown on a number of occasions, and one of the things that they say to me is we want to get more and more involved in our city. This is a university that has such a high national profile, but I think that they do appreciate the local responsibility. And we as council members, as the legislative body for this city, we do a better job if we can pull on the data that our incredible universities produce. And when they produce that information specifically for us, I think it really creates a mandate that we do something about it. And one of the cool things that you should know about this council is that I guarantee you every council member here today, including myself, will read every word of this report, and several other council members will as well. And so while we may have a history, and not uniquely so, of having good reports and not necessarily doing anything with it, all of us will study these reports, and I think we'll do our best to act on them. And I will say the same of our Deputy Mayor for greater economic opportunity. But there are 2 important things that I want to point out as I started skimming this report. 2 data points. The first is on page 3, and it says the median annual income in DC for white families is $120,000, while it is $41,000 for African-American families. That's for an entire family. And on page 5, it says white households have a net worth 81 times greater than black households, $284,000 versus $3,500. And if that doesn't create a knot in your stomach that sits in your stomach unless and until we resolve this issue, then I don't know what to say to you. But I can tell you that it does turn knots in my stomach. And I think that my colleagues and I take personal responsibility for developing policies that eat away at these types of statistics. I do believe that we all came here for a particular purpose, and part of the purpose is to continue the strong trajectory of the city, but to really protect and be deliberate about protecting the people who are being left behind in this city, who tend to be predominantly African American, and unfortunately in this city, very low income. And I have very personal family experience being a 5th generation Washingtonian, but the only college graduate. And so I have seen my own family almost entirely price out of this city and really struggle at the margins. But I am proud to be a part of this council and to be a part of a city government that does care. And so our objective is to get it right. We won't always agree on the approach, right, Deputy Mayor? But I think we agree a lot more than we disagree. And the one thing that I know about the administration, about my colleagues, is that we are all intent on getting this right. There's less pride of ownership than there is pride of accomplishment. So I thank again Georgetown University for your work on this, and especially to you, Professor Jackson, for your incredible work. And I look forward to reading this report. Thank you.
Before we get started today, I just want to recognize and thank my colleagues from Georgetown's Office of Government Relations and Community Engagement who are here today, especially Emmanuel Reed and Heidi Sue, if they're here and could just raise their hands, as well as Heidi and Emmanuel really focused. Their leadership made today possible, so thank you to them. And also other colleagues, Brenda Atkinson, Willoughby, Kevin Connery, Sam Dejois, and Peter Prindeville. So if you could just join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you. I also wanted to say a quick word about breakfast, which I hope you have enjoyed. Our caterer today is Adrenaline 365 Cafe, located on Good Hope Road inside the Anacostia Arts Center, right in Ward 8. I think Chef Lightfoot is in the back corner there. Thank you for being here today. Just a word about these guys. Their mission is to better serve and service the Anacostia neighborhood by training individuals to craft and serve naturally prepared and artistically designed foods. They are working to help put DC residents to work and are a wonderful local business to work with. It is our second time working with them. They are really easy and great to work with. So anyone who's got catering needs, we definitely encourage you to show them some love and give them their business. Now, thank you. Now let's go ahead and get started with the presentation, which the council, by the way, has given you half of. So it'll be quick. I'm delighted to be able to introduce my colleague and friend, Professor Maurice Jackson. Professor Jackson is an accomplished scholar with a BA from Antioch College and a master's and a PhD from Georgetown, where he now teaches in the history department and the African American Studies program. He is the author of many books and articles and even CD liner notes on several jazz CDs. Later this year, his new book, Jazz in DC, will be published, and he is now at work on his next book, which I know we'll all be interested in, Halfway to Freedom, African American and the Struggle for Social Progress in Washington, D.C. And although he is an accomplished academic, he is no stranger to the real world and real work, having also worked as a longshoreman, a shipyard rigger, a construction worker, and a community organizer. And luckily for us, then Mayor Gray appointed him to the African American Affairs Commission, where he served from 2013 to 2016. So now, to share his important research, let me turn it over to Professor Jackson.
Thank you all for coming. I speak fast and I speak quick, so forgive me. And thank you all for coming and spending this morning with us. Thank you, Mr. Mendelson. You've always been a friend of the African American Commission. Thank you, Mr. Gray. I should tell you the reason I was appointed was I was giving a speech at Georgetown and Mr. Gray was there. And then the president of Georgetown, Jack DeJoya, was there, and they had known each other for many years. So next thing I get a call and they ask would I be on the commission. And I said, well, I don't do good on these things because I don't like to go to a lot of meetings and I don't do well with big egos. And they said, well, you can be the chair. And then I had meetings and egos, but as soon as shortly after Mr. Gray had appointed me, then he left. So Mr. Gray, you have promises to keep to me about getting this commission going. So I look forward to it. Thank you, Ms. Silverman, for coming, for your insightful remarks. And I didn't sleep last night much. My wife's away, and I don't sleep much anyway. I've had a knee and back surgery and stuff, and so she called this morning and asked, and I said, well, this is a sort of tough for me because when you offer recommendations often to the city and people, it's like you're beating them. Sometimes they just push back and don't accept them, and I'm just so happy that you all look at this in the spirit that I give it. I have been in the city a long time. I've raised 2 children. My wife is from here. I've gone to college. Mr. Gray, I spent a year at Edgewood Terrace as a house painter, painting that big complex. There's not much I haven't done, and this is my city, and I love it, and we offer this in essence. Mr. White, thank you for your kind remarks and looking at the issue. I wish Mr. Todd were here. You can tell him that I said he should be here. I'm a professor, so I don't work for the council. What are you gonna do to me? I have tenure. So you should be here, sir. This commission. Now, if you're sick or something, I understand, but the chair of the council is here and 3 or 4 other members. So, well, this report, and especially if you're overseeing the commission. So I understand that people have difficulties. Thank you, some members of the commission here. My good and long time and dear friend, the historian of the city, Janet Hostin Harris, has just been a great supporter. And then Arjua Asama is also a commission. Thank you all for coming. Lastly, I'd like to pay a special thanks to the president of my university, Dr. Jack DeJoya. He's been in the city a long time, and he has been supportive of everything. Understand this now. As a college professor, and I teach 18th century history, 17th, 18th century history. I'm talking here now about Black folks. If I were writing about, I've traveled the world. I was active in not so much of the world. If I was in Cambodia, if I was in Timbuktu, if I were in some little village in the Caucasus, if I was in Grenada, something writing about that, I'd be a hero at Georgetown. But see, now I'm just talking about Black folks. And that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, not in this city. But the president of my university has been so supportive. He's given me a time off. His office funded the printing and the publishing of the report, and I just can't thank him enough. And his board of directors have just been very important. In this report, my friends, I seek only to tell the truth, without hype, without playing with the numbers, as many do. We play with the numbers too much in this city. It's shameful sometimes. Infant mortality is going way down. Well, infant mortality is going down for one reason, because I saw the other day that the mayor was talking about the difficulties for Black women in certain parts of the city to get to the hospital, and the effect that has. Infant mortality is going down because more and more young whites are having children, and it brings the rate down. No, that's good. I'm not against that, but African Americans' infant mortality rate is not going down that much. We say, oh, the educational levels of young students is going up. The testing, look at that, scores for the young African Americans is not going up that much because their parents are 15 and 20 and 25 and don't have an education. And we know that you do well in school when you have parents that can nurture you. Don't play with the numbers. And so I've sought not to do that, just to tell the truth, without hype, without any personal motivation, just to try to solve this dilemma, the dilemma of why so many of our people are leaving and why so many are unqualified. The issues presented in this report have been the subject of great debate and will be, of lots of study. It's well documented. And I ask each of you only, I don't even carry one of those things. and it's well documented. I ask you only to study it and study it completely, as Mr. White and others say, just read it. Sometimes, I've been married a long time, almost 40 years. And sometimes when you're married that long, you say something and all of it's defensiveness. Sometimes you just have to listen. I went to the hardware store this past weekend. And my wife said, "You wearing that?" I said, "Dear, we're going to the hardware store. I wear blue jeans. I wear blue jeans all the time. This is just, something she made me put on, And I'm in the hardware store and this lady comes up to me and says, hey hey, man, boys, will you get me a 10-pound bag of dirt? And my wife said, I told you not to wear those clothes in this hardware store. And I said, lady, I'm sorry, but the only woman I work for is that one right there. And then my wife gets madder. So sometimes you just have to listen a little bit. And I just ask you to listen. I offer no wasted words, no grand claims, just the hard, cold facts. And the facts tell us that we must all do more to halt the flow of blacks out of this city and to make life better for those who can. This is an issue that affects the entire city and the population. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a study, Mr. Gray and others, about Ward 76, why there weren't so many grocery stores there, any. And it was very interesting because one of the most key things that came out of the report was that young whites in the city who have recently moved have these very same concerns about gentrification. They are concerned now because they want their kids to live in a city that is multiracial, multicultural, not just looking like them. And they can see the effects still. And you worry about that for your kids because you know that is the primary thing. Raising the kid right around other people makes that kid a decent person. But if you start off as a rotten person at 3, you'll be a rotten one at 30. I know, I can guarantee you. I've seen too many, I'm a teacher. I see it too often. In 1967, Washington became the first large city with a majority black population. In 1960, it was 53.9%. It rose to 71.1% in 1970. However, by 2015, it dipped to below 50% for the first time in 60 years to 48.3%. Much of the population loss can be attributed to the economy. Simply put, African Americans, some born and raised in DC, have been priced out by the housing market and pushed out by the job market due to the lack of available jobs, but primarily by the lack of skills, training, and lack of educational attainment. Shifts in the federal workforce and creation of some higher paid private employee jobs outside the city, along with higher housing costs and a notion that affordable housing and equality schools are more acceptable in the suburbs, have also caused middle and high income people to leave. I can remember, I didn't quite understand it, my friends, when Marion Barry would always talk about the black middle class, I didn't quite understand it. Then I watched his film. And as I looked, I realized after all that time, that what they were talking about was not so much the higher class, but that African Americans with skills, with educations, were brought into the city. And one reason, people of some affluence left because they couldn't afford the house and the school. You had to choose both, one or the other. My wife and I struggled. We wanted to stay in the city. She said, well, maybe we should go. No, dear, we stayed in the city. So we have to look at that. And what happened to this African American middle class? One thing that Barry did, and I didn't quite understand it then, he called a business in and he said, look, you want to do business in the city, you got to hire. And maybe we have to get sort of rough with some of these businesses now. Say, you want to do business, you have to hire. You in your office, what are they going to say to you? I have students come in, they mess up. I have athletes come into my office and they mess up. And I say, oh, you're in my office now. So I say, you got to do better. You can't do this to your mother who's spending this money and your father. But you have to do better in the city. Leaders and others. Now, let me just run through this slideshow very quickly, and then I'll stop. It'll take just a few moments. Now, thank you those who helped me. My students from Georgetown Day School generally do my PowerPoint. So this is the second of the report. The first, oh, come, Chris. You see, I always keep a student with me. All right. So the commission was established in 2011. It was established by legislation created by Mr. Barry and Mr. Gray. Took efforts to create it. And under Mr. Gray and then Ms. Bowser's tenure, a staff office has been established, but not enough staff in that. This is the first and this is the second and last report. I'm done. I'm retiring from anything to do with this type. It's taken 2 or 3 years of my life. I got to finish this book. My wife wants me to be more enjoyable at home. This can kill you. So we look at the scope of inquiry, the African Americans in the city, the opportunities, the lack of opportunities, and analyze how the population decline is directly related to the lack of these opportunities. And we suggest policies and ideas. The unemployment rate, you see them now, but that's just, as I say, a nut in the bucket. If you look at the unemployment rates in Southeast, in Ward 7 and Ward 8, they're 3 or 4 more times. In Ward 8, they're about 27, 28%, primarily young African-American men. But with that, income goes down. The median income in Ward 7 went down from 34,000 to 31,000, nearly 200% drop. Whereas in Ward 2, it jumped nearly 65%, from 114 to 189. Something is wrong in this house. The median income, now, don't let that fool you. Median means what? Middle. But half the families in DC aren't making that, and white families are making more than that. The average white family is making, but it's low because so many young whites are moving in. But still, 3 times. In 1960, it was white families made around $4,900 to $5,000 average, and black families around $2,000. So the disparity has gone up. Whereas 1960, it was twice as much. Now it's 3 times as much. Net worth. What does that mean? That just means that the money you have worth something. You have your house. You have the mortgage of the house. You have the things in your house. You add all up, divided minus what you owe on those. And that's 80. Now, this, of course, is misleading because this brings in some of the many of the younger whites come in. But if we look at the old line whites, we know it's much greater than that. And this looks briefly, it's in your book around the employment section, and we'll talk about that. You can see the federal government is going down a little bit, but places are going up. Education, health services. The main would be legal services. And as Ms. Silverman said, a lot of jobs, especially in leisure and other services, in hospital techs, may not require a degree, but they require skill. And they require the medical apprenticeship programs. The problem with the DC apprenticeship program is it mainly deals with hard hats. Tell me what you want, I know. It mainly deals with the unions, these old boy white unions. I know, I came up with it. I tried to get in the Carpenters Union when I was working there, Mr. Gray, they wouldn't let me in. This is many years ago. But so we need these registered apprentice programs in many of these hospitalities. And we have this, Georgetown University has a policy. 50% of the people must come from the city. They can't say they must be African-American because you can't say, but if you say I want a lot of them to come from Anacostia, what do you think? And so we would do it. And the university does do it, thank goodness. And construction and all of these things and these retail. But we must also say that we must do more for our kids in the sense of providing jobs and other things like that. The educational level, as Mr. White said, it's heartbreaking. 26% of African Americans. That doesn't mean the 20% of the ones who are born and raised in DC. This includes many who've come from outside. The numbers go up. 73% of white residents. Now, in the early 20s, and I dropped out of college a couple of times. And I went back to graduate school, in my late 30s, so I know that sometimes the numbers can go up. But 26% of African Americans, 50% of African American residents have no training past that. Now, this doesn't include the large number of African American men in this city who drop out of high school. So I saw something the other day, someone said, oh, we're doing well, we're registering so many for a program. It doesn't mean anything, registering for a program. That's like saying you start school at the beginning of the year, I've started. But if you don't get the diploma, it doesn't mean anything. It just means you're registered. Right. And so we look at the education job competition. Look at this. 9%, you can see the numbers in the book. But 7% of those who don't have these qualifications are African Americans and don't have these associate degree, which is a 2-year degree. We can do better. Literacy rates, 170,000 out of almost 500,000 don't have the basic literacy level. And out of that 90,000 are illiterate, which means cannot read a newspaper. This is something we would hear about in Africa in the 1960s. We cannot allow this. And so the recommendations are here. Ms. Silverman has gone through them a bit, thank you. But it's a little deeper than that, because in many cases, you're right, there have been programs and there have been money, and the DC Fiscal Policy Institute has shown us, there have been millions of dollars left on the table. Whoever's responsible should be fired. Why are you promoting them? Why are you introduced to fire them? You leave money on the table when people are suffering. It makes no sense. I'd fire them, but so you can see where I am, and you see why I'm not on the council. And you must partner with growing industries. And these mean that Go outside and look when there's a job fair. There'd be 10,000 people going around, what you call it, used to call it the Walter Washington Center. Thousands. And then you look and see how many of those getting jobs are from the inner city. You can train people. And we have to do more. We should not stop and say, well, if you don't make it here, we can help kids. We can help kids finish this training. We can help them. Apprenticeship programs and others are good. But if they want to go to college, but they should. I come up poor, raised by grandmother. If I can make it, anybody can, if they get a chance. But we have to give them that. And the registered apprentice program, develop these programs with the U.S. government that will work with you and partner with you. And we'll hear a little bit more about that today. With these emerging industries and the first source programs, and Georgetown and others are part of that. And we must fully fund that. There's no need of saying we have, and Brian is here, Ferguson from the Office of Returning Citizens. It's no need of having our kids come and say, and he can tell you, sign them up, and they've had a mark on their blemish, and then you don't fund the office and things like that to aid them in everything they can do, including jobs and things like that. Thank you for coming. Lastly, let me just say this. Just one line, if I can find it. It's from William Raspberry, and it's many years ago. How many of you all, some of you all know who William Raspberry was. Most of you all over 30 should know. And even if you're over the hell, I know who George Washington is, and I wasn't living with George Washington. So you just got to read sometime. And William Raspberry said this: too many of us, I'm afraid, have recognized only the surface effects of these evil decades. We see defeated men, now 40, who are the products of bad students, jobs and hopelessness. We can confess they are the victims of the American system, and victims mainly because they are Black. And we could change those names that he said from 40 years to 20 years. We cannot give up on the young people of this city. We have to do more. Thank you very much.
I think you can see why Professor Jackson is one of the most popular professors on campus. We're lucky to have him. We are going to get to questions from the audience a little bit later, but to keep things moving, I think we've passed out note cards, and we'd ask that you write your questions on the note card and hold them up, and we have folks who will collect them, and we'll be able to ask them once we get into the panel conversation. So please definitely let us know what's on your mind. At this point, let me ask the panelists to come on up, and I will introduce them. So in addition to Professor Jackson, we're delighted that Deputy Mayor for Greater Economic Opportunity, Courtney Snowden, is here. We also have, there she is. We also have the CEO of the Academy of Hope, which many of you know runs 2 adult public charter schools in DC. I'm also proud to say that she is a 2014 winner of the John Thompson Jr. Legacy of a Dream Award that Georgetown gives out every year. So we're really appreciative of her being here today. We also have longtime workforce development advocate and executive director of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, Ed Lazier, and federal policy director for the National Skills Coalition, and before that, director of the DC Workforce Investment Council, Kermit Kaleba. So please welcome our panelists. So Deputy Mayor, let me start with you. Oh boy. Professor Jackson just shared some sobering numbers. And I think, they are deflating to a lot of us who care about these issues a lot. Tell us why we shouldn't just give up and go home. What can the city do to really address these issues head on?
So I would frame that question just a little differently, as you might imagine, and not say what can, but what is the city doing?
Great.
Because we're doing quite a bit. First, I obviously want to thank, yes, I need this sometimes. Hello, everybody. First, I want to thank Georgetown University for the work that you're doing, both in terms of research and creating a platform for such an amazing professor and Dr. Jackson. 2, I want to thank you for the partnership that we've had. I will talk about, as this panel goes on, some of the great work we're able to do together that we think is moving the ball forward. I think certainly what I can say is some of the facts in the report are absolutely sobering, right? I'll tell you about some of the success though. For 17 years, our Department of Employment Services and more generally our workforce system has been at the bottom. We heard time and time again from the Department of Labor, and it ended with us getting on high risk in 2012. When I visited the regional office in Philadelphia with our regional administrator, he sat at a table that was 8 feet long with a binder, not one binder, I'm sorry, a table full from one end of the table to the other of 6-inch binders full of information and correspondence with the District of Columbia, illustrating how badly we had dropped the ball over the years. Well, guess what happened at the end of the summer? We were removed as the only jurisdiction in the country on high risk. Now, what does that mean? For most people, it doesn't mean much, but the reality, it means that our system is not only improving, but we're improving faster than we ever have. And importantly, we're responding to the significant challenges that are being thrown at us, and more importantly, the ones that exist in this report. So let me tell you how we're doing that. What I was excited about by the recommendations, and I will receive them with an open heart and a warm welcome, is that we're doing a lot of this stuff. We rolled out Apprenticeship DC, which is our statewide apprenticeship program focused on expanding apprenticeships. When we came in January of 2015, there were 6,000 apprentices in the District of Columbia. Guess how many were district residents? Less than 1,500. Well, that's a problem. And we have made a concerted effort to make sure that we're expanding apprenticeship opportunities beyond the construction trades. We also have IT, and we're expanding it even beyond that. So that's one thing that we're up to. Two, we love project empowerment. In fact, we agree with Councilmember Silverman that it is a critically important and high quality program that is making opportunities available to some of our residents with the absolute highest barriers. We agree that the program is so good that we expanded it and now and have put it under an umbrella called the Division of State Initiatives. I hate the name too. Under that program, though, we serve our highest barrier residents through subsidized employment programs like DC Career Connections, the Learn, Earn, Advance, and Prosper program, and Project Empowerment, where we focus on readiness but provide real and high quality subsidized employment opportunities. We expanded the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program because we understood that our young people in particular need as many opportunities as they can. And what I'm excited about is that 14-year-olds do have a different experience than 24-year-olds and everyone in between. One of the things that I think we don't talk enough about, but you did in the report, is First Source. Our administration has issued the first Source fines, and we're proud of that, again, because it means we're holding those who want to do business with the district accountable. But I'm going to tell you something else we did, and people don't talk about this in relationship to workforce, but Dr. Jackson, of course, did. We have a CBE requirement that requires that the district government spend 50% of its expendable budget with certified business enterprises. Before, we did not have a transparent system for how those dollars were calculated. And what happened was, too often, not only did we not meet our stated goal, but the number just went further and further down from the beginning of the year to the end. Well, we created a transparent process. We created a real goal. We created something called the Green Book. How many people know what the Green Book is? That's right, a few of you. So you go to cbeconnect.dc.gov to check out the Green Book. It is there. And by agency, it tells you what the expendable budget is in that agency. That is, how much money are those businesses, are those agencies required to spend with businesses? Why are we so focused on that? Oh, and by the way, not only did we meet the goal we set for the last 2 years, but last year we more than doubled that goal. Clap for that. No, really, clap for that. It's a big deal. What does that mean? That means we're getting our local resident-owned SBEs in particular and our local CBE community, we're getting them business, more and more business. They're able to see in a more transparent way what business opportunities are available. But most importantly, those folks are hiring district residents. And because we are actually implementing First Source in a positive way, we actually believe we're going to see some critical improvements. I know I'm going to need to stop soon, but I also want to mention 2 other things. We increased the minimum wage with the help of the council. They did hard work with us to make sure that we could get the business community on board to do something really important, because we know we have to raise wages in the city. And finally, and I think this is really important, we launched a program called Financially Fit DC to focus on fixing that wealth gap that exists in our city. If you have not been to this website, please visit it. It is for everyone at every income level, because what's sort of implied by Dr. Jackson's statistic about wealth and the wealth gap is that actually exists no matter your wage, no matter how much money you're making, right? And so what we want to make sure is that our residents are fully prepared to take advantage of this affordable housing that we're building at $100 million a year, more than any administration. And we're really focused on making sure that we're preparing district residents to take advantage of and access the expanding prosperity that's crisscrossed the city.
Thank you. Kermit, let me bring you into this. So if you look at the numbers, we have made a lot of progress on bringing the unemployment number down. And we certainly know that the city is doing a lot, spending a lot of money, a lot of good, well-intentioned work. But the last time I looked, DC, if you look at it in terms of the DC, in terms of the national, if you exclude Alaska, let me just say it that way, if you're excluding Alaska, DC has still has the highest unemployment rate of any state. What are some of the challenges that we are really continuing to still struggle with so that these programs aren't even more effective?
Sure, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I want to just first say, I want to give full credit to the Bowser administration and the Gray administration before that for the hard work in getting off of the high risk status. I can remember when I first started at the Workforce Investment Council, I was presented with this list of 47 corrective action items across the district that we had to fix. You guys were able to finally fix that, and I think that's a really impressive accomplishment, so I really want to give a lot of credit. I think we've made a lot of progress in this system. But I think, let me say, I think, and this is not unique to the district, but I think the report does a good job of showing how the unique demographic and economic challenges that face district residents. It really is, the real challenge is this gap in skills, and in particular, and I think, again, the report does a really good job of this gap around literacy and numeracy skills. If 50% of all jobs in the district's labor market are going to require a bachelor's degree and beyond, if we know that probably 70 to 80% of all jobs in the district labor market are going to require some form of post-secondary education and training beyond high school, then we really have to be thinking about how do we make sure that people get literacy, numeracy skills, how do they get a high school diploma, and how do they transition from wherever they're coming from in life, how do we make sure that they're transitioning into getting a post-secondary credential, whether it's through a traditional academic institution or whether it's through apprenticeship, whether it's through other pathways. So I do think that's really the next challenge. There's a kind of a famous cliche that the best anti-poverty program is a job. But I don't think that's true anymore. The best anti-poverty program now is a career, because one of the things we saw in the recession was just because you have a job doesn't mean you're going to stay employed when the economy turns down. What we saw was people who had lower educational levels, lower skills attainment, lost jobs at much higher rates when the economy went down than the individuals with higher educational attainment. So what our goal should be, and what a lot of states are starting to do across the country, is really starting to set goals around credential attainment, secondary attainment, post-secondary attainment, and thinking about how are we aligning all of our different systems to make sure that individuals are getting the skills and the credentials they need to get a secondary diploma, but then to transition to some sort of post-secondary education and training. Does everyone have a plan? And is that connected to what employers are looking for? So I think that's, and this is not something that's unique to the district. Again, I think every state, every large city across the country is just wrestling with these issues. How do we create meaningful career pathways that allow people to work, raise a family, but continue their education and their skills attainment so that they can advance in a career and have that sort of sustainability that they need over time? I think apprenticeship is one of those tools, and I think we're seeing a lot of interest in apprenticeship in this at the federal level and across the states. I think it's important to remember that apprenticeship isn't just construction, it's not just skilled trades. Apprenticeship is something that can be applied across a range of different industries. We've seen great examples across the country in healthcare and information technology, in educational systems. So you're really thinking about how do we expand work-based learning more broadly to a range of different industries. So I think I think the fact that Apprenticeship DC is in place is a great step. I think we really need to be thinking about how do we expand it out. One thing I'll sort of say is sort of a continuing challenge, or at least it was a challenge as I saw it when I was here in the district, is just sort of coordinating and aligning all of the different systems. So something that, that the report highlights is there are 6 different agencies in the district that have some form of job training program. And that doesn't count the community college. It doesn't count the very good institutions of higher education that we have across the country. There's a lot of different places where we're getting access to higher education and job training. And that, and again, doesn't count all the great community-based organizations and other partners who are out there. They don't always talk to one another, and they don't always talk to one another in a way that's useful for business to understand, right? Nobody wants to sit on 6 different industry advisory councils. No employer that I've ever talked to has said, I need more time spent in sitting on advisory councils. But it's also not fair to workers, right? To have them try to figure out the different network of agencies and programs and services that are out there. I do think this is something that, it's again, this is something that a lot of different jurisdictions are wrestling with, is how do we make this both more transparent but also more seamless for job seekers? If I'm coming to you at a 3rd grade reading level and I want to become a registered nurse, how do I get there? What's my pathway? And how are you going to make that possible for me? Recognizing it's going to take a little time, but I'm going to get there. And what are the pieces that I need? How do we make that as easy as possible as we can for every single resident in the district, regardless of where they live, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of where they're starting from? And so I think that's really what I would say is a strengthening alignment across all of these different systems. And I think making sure that post-secondary institutions in particular are a part of that solution. That was one thing I didn't see in the report that I would love to see, is what role can colleges and universities and the community college, what role can they be playing in partnering with other institutions and with the government to make sure that we're creating these educational opportunities?
Thank you. So, Sister, let me ask you, I'm going to ask you to tell it like it is. We're in the heart, we're in the Wilson building, the heart of the DC government. We're throwing around lots of acronyms. We're talking about, funding mechanisms and all that sort of thing. You run a program that has 2 public adult charter schools. You see folks that the system has in some ways already failed. What is it to your ears when you participate in a conversation like this? How does your experience hear this conversation?
Well, my experience hears it in just a conversation that I had with a learner yesterday morning who came into my office extremely frustrated. She's reading at about a 6th grade level, but she's made significant gains over the last couple of years. But her life circumstances, just listening to her, you know that the learners that we're working with are facing significant barriers, but I spent an hour and a half hearing that her life experience, her parents didn't finish school and they can't read, and she doesn't want to repeat that cycle. She has a 6-year-old child and she still sees homework that she doesn't know how to help her with. And just as angst, more than angst, is the depth of the fear that she's experiencing about repeating that same cycle of her parents and wanting to do more for her child, but wanting to do more also for her parents. I mean, her deepest desire is that she can help her mother read the applications. So that's what I'm seeing every day, just the fear, the anxiety of, staying in these long cycles of poverty. And so how do you translate that from the high level policy to the direct service that people need? And for us, that looks like, someone coming in at a 4th grade level, we've got to start at the beginning, but also keeping an eye on what's the next step, because it's really hard as an adult, first to walk through an adult education program and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with this. I have children, I've done a successful life, I've been able to hide it a little bit, from the rest of the folks that are a part of my life, but I know that in order for me to change my life, I need to get this high school credential, but I need a better job for my family. So for us, it's a really supportive environment, understanding that it's tough for adult learners to walk through that door, but really encouraging adults who've had unsuccessful school experiences to know that they can do this, to really see the potential that they have to really change their lives. Then we jump in with the reading, writing, and math. I mean, we start that. I always say that teaching someone reading, writing, and math and the work skills, that's the easy part. Now, my teachers will probably throw something. But I'm saying that in jest because so much of it is really shifting the mind to see themselves as successful learners. And so we do a lot of work around that. We also provide those wraparound supportive services. Our Director of Student Support is here. When we made the transition to a charter in 2014, I say that we're a 30-plus startup because we made the transition to charter in 2014, and that's been a startup for us. So we started from the beginning. But we were a small volunteer-run organization. We knew our learners were experiencing some significant barriers, but it was only after making that transition to charter and being able to bring in a student support team that we realized how difficult it is to deal with those barriers and how many barriers our learners were dealing with to get to school. I mean, we just had a big win with the DC Adult and Family Literacy Coalition and a lot of others in getting transportation support for our learners. Just getting to school is a challenge. So the reading, writing, but also, as Kermit mentioned, adults can do more. You know, historically, adult literacy programs have focused on the academics, and then we hand people off to the next stage. It takes a long time to do that. What we know now is that an integrated program where we're working on both those literacy skills and the workforce skills is the route to get people out of those long swaths of poverty into self-sustaining employment much quicker than doing step by step. And so that's where we're starting to go. I mean, we're really excited. Just recently, I will talk about it. You know, recently, you know, the funding through OSSI and the Workforce Investment Council and DOES to really start for us, which is a major transition, this move into a more integrated program, doing the academic work and the workforce piece and helping people to really start to prepare while they're with us. And when they leave us, not only do they have the high school credential, but they have skills that they can go into employment that starts to pull them out of poverty. So that's what it looks like for us day to day.
So Ed, let me ask you a question. You have been a long time and powerful voice in the city about growing inequality. And I think you've been, I don't think I understate the case when I say that you've been a really effective advocate for taking the growing prosperity of our city and reinvesting in our people. So you've had very, very good success in getting the city to spend more on these initiatives. I guess what the other thought that is in my head is, aside from spending more money, what are additional things that you think that we as a city could be doing to help move the needle and continue to move the needle?
Thank you for that question, Chris. And of course, I would like to start by saying how we should also spend more money, and maybe I'll jump into a little bit.
I knew that's what you were going to say, so I wanted to make you go down a level.
So I do want to thank Georgetown for holding this event, and particularly Professor Jackson for writing this report and for his passion today. You're an asset for the city, so thank you very much. And I do want to also start by saying, not just because of the advocacy of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, but the commitment of our mayor and council, we are a city that does a lot. And we have a lot to build on. We're a prosperous city that invests in things like Project Empowerment, a locally funded program to help people mostly who are returning citizens get a job. And when I talk to my colleagues in other communities across the country, they're envious that we have programs like this when we do invest more in affordable housing. So I am not going to answer your question directly at first, to say that there are plenty of things that we still need to do. And I guess it's identifying where the gaps are and then filling them. Sometimes it's policy and sometimes it's money. So for example, just this summer, the council led by Council Members Silverman and Robert White we're able to put money in our budget to make sure that people who are in adult education classes can actually get there, because we knew from talking to those learners that as many as a third of them were not able to get to class on any given day because they just couldn't afford bus fare. And what a shame that was for them, for holding them back. And for the city itself to not actually make good use of that investment in adult education if people aren't actually getting to class and completing it. So that's an example where we just need to keep identifying where the problems are and filling the gaps. So another issue that's on the horizon, which is both policy and money, maybe that's answering your question, plus and Chris, is around early education for infants and toddlers. So we've identified, in partnership with many others, including DC Appleseed, that the city is not investing enough in its early childhood system for infants and toddlers. So we're not providing high quality child care for our youngest children, which makes it harder for them to then get to school ready to learn, and then has ripple effects throughout their lives. And so there's now legislation before the council that would strengthen our child care system, improve the wages for people who work in child care, which is both improving the experience for infants and toddlers and creating better jobs for DC residents. Of course, those improvements in policy will also require money as well. So I think it is just continued looking at where those gaps are, what we can do, particularly for people who have not been treated well by the system. So those second chance kind of programs like adult education and programs for returning citizens, understanding that because of the history of racism in this country and the city, that too many Black residents haven't been able to get a toehold in the economy and achieve, whether it's education or skill building, by the time they're an adult, and that we need to make sure that we are continuing to focus on reinvesting or finding ways for people to get back into things that will help them build their dreams, build their income, and build their wealth.
Thank you. Professor Jackson, I feel like in a year we should come back and we should ask you to grade the city and how it does in terms of internalizing the report. But of all the things you're hearing today, what is your reaction?
How many of you all follow U.S. soccer? And the U.S. soccer team lost. And what they told us how good we're doing. You see, they assume that the world is staying still. But the U.S. soccer team isn't just doing, the other teams are doing much better. You see, so so we say things. I think the problem is many problems with spending things, but we have to do so much better. The situation is an emergency level. What Chris pointed out, I'm sorry, what Ed just pointed out about educational levels and about early young. Understand this: you have a man who's 60, has no education. He has a child 40, no education. He has a child 20, no education. Child 5. You have 3 or 4 generations, and it keeps adding. But we have those kids in that 50 to 20. I spent a summer the other year. I should have been working on my own project, but I was asked to work with some summer kids in the mayor's program. So I worked with them for about 4 or 5 weeks, and some had graduated from high school, and some were in college. They basically could not do an assignment. Now I'm a university professor. I work with kids, but I also work with a lot of athletes. I know the difference between disparities and things like that. I can work with you if you want to work. But here were kids who did not, number one, did not work, but who didn't listen because they had not necessarily been taught. It was important that you can survive, that you can do, but you got to have that. And so that has to come from the parents in many ways. Sometimes the parents have given up. So we have to do more. I hear what my friend Courtney is saying. I read the paper, Courtney. Oh man, this is going to be out of receivership. I'm jumping cartwheels, she said in the paper. There you go, but don't jump yet. I want to see. But as I said before, we can talk about signing up, but we have to see some results very quickly, and we have to see where those programs are. Let me give you another example, and I talk a little bit about it in the report, and we didn't have enough time. You know, I'm a jazz man. I like to go to U Street, and I used to go to U Street, and I was here when they were tearing it up, and there were only 3 black businesses there at the time. It was my good friend, Mrs. Virginia Lee, just a wonderful woman, Rick's Flower Shop, Industrial Park, and Duke's Shoe Shine. And before there's Bohemian Cabin. Walk up to U Street now. How many black businesses? The same or less, Ms. Selman, same or less. We are not doing enough. And so we have to do things to help create those things. Now, maybe some things are being done in other places, but I mean real job creation. I don't mean giving somebody a contract where they can get 2 or 3 grand. It means nothing. I mean creating constant. Now, the last thing is, you know, we do a good job at certain things. We are fixing all the schools. Dunbar is a beautiful school. It can hold 1,300 people. How many people in school there? How many? 500? 500 or 600? We're waiting basically until the young whites old enough so they start saying they get. I live not far from Roosevelt. Beautiful, 100 soccer field, but it's half full. And so what can we do? We have to find what those kids are. In this sense, we have to bring in trade and vocation and things like that. But in Europe, once you get an apprenticeship, and you can start at 8 or 9 or 10, it doesn't bind you to a craft. If you want to go to school for it, you can do it. So we have to do more than U.S. soccer and just stay in alone and spend and then blaming ourselves when the world is passing. We have to catch up with the world.
Okay, I want to try to go lightning round here. We've got some questions from the audience. So I'd ask you to, anyone can chime in, but just try to keep your responses yeah, like think of it as like a tweet. DC is very progressive in its policies and then often falls short in implementation. Are there specific systems in place to ensure that this report gets put into place? And then there's a related question, which is what commission is working to solve some of these issues?
So I'm gonna pretend it's Facebook and not Twitter. And
you got to
that
post.
wasn't funny. Y'all didn't get that? Come on, wake up, get some coffee, friends. So I think what we have to acknowledge is that we have a lot of work to do, that we are talking about fixing and reversing systemic challenges that have existed in this city and obviously across the nation for far too long. At the same time, though, while acknowledging that we have a lot of work to do, we also have to acknowledge that a lot of good work has been done and we are moving in the right direction. Unemployment is lower in the District of Columbia than it has been ever, at lowest recorded levels, and the greatest decreases have existed in Ward 7, 8, and Ward 5. Now, why is that? That is an intentional focus by this administration and a number of partners across the city to ensure that we are developing programs that actually get to our highest barrier folks. Does that mean it's working right now for every single person? No, I'm not suggesting that. But again, we do have to celebrate our success where it happens. Here's what I would say in terms of just some of the comments that have been made, and obviously that relate back to your question. I think Kermit is absolutely right that we need to develop an integrated system that creates no wrong door approach for our residents, and where agencies are more effectively talking. What I would say is before 2015, what we had seen was a bunch of independent programs that didn't communicate very well with each other. Well, with the advent of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act and our commitment to really change the way in which we do business in the District of Columbia, we are building an integrated workforce system. And an example of that integration are these grants that we just let out that focus on literacy as well as workforce training at the same time. So you're right, sir, and we're excited to be doing that work.
Ed, did you want to get in here?
I would make two quick things. One is that we all.
I waited till you took a breath.
I think we all need to demand more transparency from DC government and reporting on what's working and what's not, so that we all as citizens, the council, even the executive branch themselves, have the information they need to make better decisions, and combine that with more experimentation on trying new things and seeing what works. You can do lots of simple, small, short experiments and then build success in a little progress at a time.
So I'm going to move on. This is an interesting question. So most of the data and trends in the report stop at 2014, and Professor Jackson, we know that has to do with when you really focused on this project. But many of the speakers have suggested that things are improving, but there's still a long way to go. Is there more recent data to suggest that things really are improving? If so, what?
Well, actually, let me just say this. Much of the employment stuff goes to 2016. The employment numbers are there. And the cost year, there's no indication. If you get the summer figures, the numbers go up. The numbers go up because we have short-term employment. But it's still 4 or 5 times going to U.S. government figures there. So the figures are on those things are quite modern. And granted, hopefully now, if Ms. Snowden and others will take the report and look at it deeply, in a sense of what the recommendations are.
Great.
I would just say, unlike the council members, I actually have read the report from cover to cover and was really excited again to see that a good number of the recommendations we're already implementing. There is a fair amount of data. One of the things that I'd like to point out to folks, once you read the report, you'll see that Project Empowerment is a program that we are really excited about. 74% of individuals who get in that program and complete their subsidized work experience, end up in long-term employment. We're very proud of that fact. We have independent research that confirms that, which we are delighted to provide, and I think is probably available on our website at DOES. I would just say the other pieces, look, we are really focused on getting more and more people into the labor market, into the labor force. Here's what we knew. When our system worked a little bit better, we would see unemployment numbers increase. The reason why they increase is because it really is a tool to count how many people are looking for work and working to get into the workforce. Well, that in some ways is a sort of perverse good thing, right? It means more and more people are working to get jobs, and it is because our workforce system is improving and they can get through that workforce system that we're seeing some of that increase. So again, I just want to say, while we have seen significant improvement with respect to the types of training programs we're offering and expanding those programs. And I would say to my friend Ed, we're being incredibly nimble as well. The Infrastructure Academy that will roll out in 2018 is just one example of us putting all of what everyone up here is talking about into practice. We are working with industry partners who have not worked with the city meaningfully before. WMATA, Washington Gas, PepCo, DC Water, and the unions to develop an Infrastructure Academy that will train district residents for jobs that are coming down the pike. We've already started that program with a Quick Path to Energy program. Why do I mention that as a big deal? The average wage in those programs is $48.56 an hour. Well, that puts you squarely in the middle class, and you can purchase a home in the District of Columbia with that wage. So we continue to work to develop programs that do just that.
Thank you. Leicester, this one I think is a good one for you. Many district residents seeking employment read and compute below the 6th grade level. Recent changes in funding are inadequate to help increase their skill level and make them eligible for many job training programs in high demand, high growth sectors. What can be done for them?
I think it's funny. One of the comments that I wanted to make was that so much of what you know, when we think about adult literacy and the workforce system, we think of them as second chance programs. And with that mindset, when we're thinking of these as second chance programs, we fund them as such. That really, you know, if we sort of shift our thinking and thinking about education as not everyone is going to move in this perfect line, getting through K-12, getting through, you know, whatever they need to do, and then getting to the high school diploma. The reality of it is, and what we fail to accept, and we've been trying to fix for many, many years, is that people will fall out of the system. And if we have a system that's adequately funded and considered a real part of this education and workforce system, we fund it as such, and they can get back in. So creating natural on-ramps for people for whatever reason, and we know this, I mean, Valerie can speak to this as well, folks don't leave school because they don't care about it. It's all of those things, including, you know, the social issues that they're experiencing, parents. I mean, the woman I spoke to this, yesterday morning, her parents were both drug users or were incarcerated. So her education was interrupted, not because she wanted to leave, but because she had to. So thinking about those programs more as a part of our full education and workforce system, a continuum of those systems. So really thinking about on-ramps back into the system, not as, oh, maybe we'll do that, you know. And I think the funding is inadequate. And we also, there are a significant number of people, I mean, the majority of the individuals coming into adult literacy programs are reading and doing math at a 6th grade or below. And so while I think we need both systems, we need one for those people, you know, whatever's happened, you know, health reasons they've been, or they got laid off, can get quickly into the workforce system back in with some reskilling and upskilling. But we also have to accept that there are a large number of people who are going to take 2 years. And we need to stick with them for the long haul, because getting someone from, you know, a beginning reading level up to the 8th grade level that's needed to even begin to study for the GED exam takes a little while, and especially if you're going part-time.
Okay. We're just about out of time, and I apologize that we weren't able to get to all the questions. I think we could continue the discussion for hours. Unfortunately, schedules don't allow it. But I want to thank everyone who submitted a question. I'm going to ask one more. And Kermit, let me send this to you, and if anyone else wants to react to it. What is the city outlook and approach to vocational education? I've not heard any reference to vocational education.
Oh, well, I guess I'm not sure if I'm actually the right person to answer this, since I've been out. I haven't worked for the city for almost 3 years. But I will say, I mean, I think, you know, so we've seen the creation of the Career Academy several years ago. And I think those, have you expanded beyond the original ones? So the Career Academy model is a nationally recognized model where we're really focusing on the integration of occupational skills and academic skills in a really intensive way. And I think it's a really important model. I think the comments that the professor made earlier about career and technical education, vocational education being under-resourced and ignored historically, I think that's very, very true. And so I do think the district has made some really important steps in the right direction, sort of making sure that that we're investing in these kind of integrated academic and occupational models. It's something I think that we ought to be thinking about more aggressively in terms of how are we helping students who are not planning to go to four-year college, but who want to get into the labor market directly after high school, or who want to go onto a community college or a shorter-term occupational program. How are we helping them find that pathway? How are we making sure that that pathway is successful? How are we connecting those academies with businesses? How are we connecting our broader career and technical education programming with the business community? How are we making sure that the business community has an opportunity to weigh in on the curriculum, to contribute, to create work-based learning opportunities for those students? I think that's one of the advantages of the Career Academy model, is that it does really sort of emphasize the role of business. And so I think it's great that the district is doing that. I think that can be expanded. The other thing I'll say is, you know, career and technical education, we often talk about it primarily from a secondary standpoint as a K-12 process. But career and technical education also happens at the post-secondary level. The federal government, through the Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, provides funding to support career and technical education at the post-secondary level. And I think we really do need to be using those dollars to make sure that there's both transitions from secondary into post-secondary career and technical education programs, but also as Leicester is talking about, making sure that there's pathways for people who didn't go immediately from high school into a career or into post-secondary education, making sure that we're creating multiple on-ramps for individuals, regardless of where they are in life, regardless of where they are in their career. And so, and I think the district is on the right path. I think that, I think this is an area where we're seeing a lot of interest nationally in how do we revitalize career and technical education. And so I look forward to seeing what the city is going to do moving forward. I think it's a real opportunity for growth and a real opportunity for getting people into these middle skill jobs.
Leicester, you get the last word.
The one thing I also wanted to point out, which I failed to mention, DC is very unique in this country in that we've made a huge investment in adult public charter schools. And for us, as a community-based organization, making that transition from, working on about $2,000 per student to do the work that we needed to do to uniform per pupil, we saw a 22% increase in the academic performance of our students in 1 year over the last. So dollars do count. And in DC, the adult charter piece, we don't talk a lot about that because they're not necessarily connected to we are not connected to, but we are plugged into the workforce system because we are, receive some of the OSCE funding. But I think there's a missed opportunity if we aren't looking at those adult charters and figuring out how to pull that data, because there's work happening there. And DC was the first to award adult charters, and there is a small movement underfoot to sort of look at that as a route in. To improving.
That's a good hopeful note to go out on. Please join me in thanking our panel today. And I also really want to thank all of you for giving your time to be a part of this important conversation. Thank you very much.
I did talk to Perry Stein last night from the Post. Who collects these? Good event.
Like a whole. Yeah.
Good job.